What's up, everybody? It's John Chase here. We're getting ready to do a summary of Chapter 5 of the Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. Chapter 5. Title of Chapter 5 is Harlemite. The chapter starts with talking about a 4-hour train ride from Boston to New York. Ella's friend helps Malcolm to get a job on the railroad. He was 16 at this time and he needed to pass for 21. Ella wanted Malcolm to get away from Sophia. That was her only thing. Well, that was her big thing. Oh, man. She wanted him to be a military man. That's the way she always saw him. This is Ella. Malcolm himself, he just wanted to see New York. He's heard so much about the Big Apple and how, the things that his father has told him about Harlem and the Garvey movement and the Garvey marches. The train allowed him to see D.C. as well. He was able to see the nation's capital. He mentions the one thing that caught his mind was how it was mixed between the poor people right next to the capital, and not far from the middle class blacks as well. So it was all mixed together. You had the leaders of the nation right next to the poorest people in the nation, right next to middle class blacks from Howard University. That's what he talked about. Eventually he gets on the train and he gets to go to New York. First place they visit is a place called Small's Paradise. It's a place that everybody, the people that he was with, everybody knew about it. It was one of their favorite places. Malcolm says, quote, "No Negro place had ever impressed me so much." He talks about how the black people were just cool, conservative, cool clothes, conservative clothes. They were grown men in their 30s or 40s. They weren't trying to be flashy. They weren't trying to be they weren't trying to be ingenuine. They weren't fake. So Malcolm says, quote, "Within the first 5 minutes in Smalls, I had left Roxbury forever." So he was gone. As soon as he got there, he was turned up. He liked New York. He wanted to stay where he was at. That's part of the Harlemite chapter. Part of the title, Harlemite. He said Negroes at Small weren't average Negroes. They were, quote, "the cream of the older, more mature operations in Harlem," unquote. This was the place that these older, more mature hustlers, this was the place that they hung out at in between because running numbers would stop some early in the afternoon, and then going out hustling at night would be later. So they would be at Smalls at the middle of the evening. He said around this time, the average Joe was still at work, so they had the whole place to themselves. So Malcolm travels all around Harlem. He visits Braddock Hotel, the Savoy Ballroom, Teresa Hotel. He says, quote, "This is where I belong." He says from that point on, he was on a journey to be a Harlemite. And that goes back to the title once again. He goes back to Boston and he in the time back and forth between Boston and New York, he tells Shorty and Sophia about his plans to move to New York. He did everything that he could as a train worker to keep his New York route. His staff members came to know him as, they called him Sandwich Red, because he did whatever he could to keep the customers happy and keep his position. In Harlem, he got a room near Smalls. He actually had 2 rooms. Well, he goes through 2 rooms, but he eventually gets a room in Harlem, and it's just close to Smalls. Smalls was the only thing he really cared about. He says, quote, "Harlem was Lansing or Boston times 1,000. New York was heaven, and Harlem was 7th heaven." He said he was able to make friends with people like Duke Ellington, Sonny Greer, Ray Nance, and you have to remember that this is the end of the this is after the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. So these are people that very famous at this time. He said he stayed up late night drinking and smoking in Boston and Harlem as he was traveling back and forth. He's just staying up late, drinking, coming to work tired, drunk, high, and just to make sure he's there on time. Malcolm ends up getting fired from the train job due to his behavior, just drinking and smoking. It just got to be too much. One thing they said is he was stubborn to the advice of the elders. They said, quote, you couldn't tell Malcolm nothing. The elders tried to tell him, like, this is what you need to do to keep the job, but he wasn't really trying to hear it. Malcolm said he didn't care about getting fired. Jobs at this time were plentiful due to the war. A lot of the men were getting sent off to war, so there were a lot of jobs. Okay. So what I didn't write down was he ends up taking a trip back home. And they said when he got back to Lansing, his family didn't recognize him. With his zoot suit, his conch, he just looked completely different. They even talked about there's an incident where he caused an accident due to some people trying to look at him on the road. He said that this was a time where he was able to realize that he had become more successful in his opinion than the older kids that he had once looked up to when he was younger. They say he went to see his mom in Kalamazoo. He went to see Shorty's mom. He went to see the Swirlins. I guess he just went to see everybody. He went to dance on the last night before he left. There was a big dance. He did all his best dance move, set off the party. When he got back to New York, he was completely broke though. He gets another railroad job. This time he's going to Miami he's doing a cleaning job. He got fired from this job as well, and then he gets a job at Smalls. And he said he loved this job. This is like his perfect job. He says, quote, with Smalls practically in the center of everything, waiting tables was seventh heaven 7 times over. So he really loved this job. He came to work an hour early, and with this time he would train with the older or the more senior waiters. He learned about the relationships between waiters and the bartenders and the cooks. Like it's a symbiotic relationship. He said at this time the customers were able to tell him about the history of Harlem from the 1600s all the way to the 1920s, the crash of the stock market. Other customers were able to school him on more serious things such as hustling, pimping, selling dope, and even robbery. And that's where chapter 5 ends. Share this video if you like what you heard. Visit malcolmxfoundation.org if you'd like to make a donation. And yeah, let me know if you disagree with anything I said. And that's about it. Y'all take it easy. Peace out.